Massachusetts is home to 17 units of the National Park System, and not a single one of them is a Big 63 park either. That's right folks, no national parks here in the Bay State, but there's no shortage of historic sites, historical parks, seashores, recreation areas, and scenic trails on offer here. Massachusetts was the cradle of the American Revolution and central to the Industrial Revolution in America. Its ports connected us to the world, while its native sons, presidents, poets, and park planners represent the full sweep of Massachusetts' role in the American story. Get ready for a history-focused episode as we dive into the national park sites of Massachusetts. Alright, let's just start in the Boston area for this one, since there is a pretty high concentration of NPS sites there. First up is Boston National Historical Park. This is one of those weird ones. You're not going to find like a central area or a single place that this park is most associated with. Rather, Boston National Historical Park is more or less organized around the Freedom Trail and several sites that interpret the history of Boston's role in the lead up to the American Revolution. Sites like the Boston Common, the Old South Meeting House, the site of the Boston Massacre, Faneuil Hall, the Paul Revere House, the Old North Church, the Charlestown Navy Yard, and the Bunker Hill Memorial. The other weird thing about this site is that the Park Service owns basically none of the land for the sites that I just mentioned. With the exception of the Navy Yard, most of the sites are owned and managed independently, but in cooperation with the Park Service, whose role is mainly in the storytelling/interpretation department here. They're responsible for weaving together the overarching story of Boston's revolutionary history, which is, again, the main thrust of this site. And in that same vein, Boston National Historical Park's sister park is the Boston African American National Historic Site, which operates more or less on the same model. This park is centered around the Black Heritage Trail in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood. Again, the Park Service owns very little land for this park and is more in the storytelling/interpretation game here than in the actual preservation game of physical places. As the name implies, this park is all about interpreting Boston's African American history, as the city was a particular hotbed for abolitionist sentiment in the lead up to the Civil War, as well as the overall struggle against discrimination. Beacon Hill, where this park is located, was home to more than half of the city's African American population. Next up, let's talk about Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters National Historic Site. This park is really pulling double duty in its preservation efforts, because although it only protects a single historic home in Boston's Cambridge neighborhood, that home is historically significant to two different famous Americans, George Washington and the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. It was originally built in 1759 by a Jamaican plantation owner by the name of John Vassall Jr., but George Washington used it as his first headquarters during the early stages of the American Revolution. He occupied it from July of 1775 to April of 1776. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow then moved into this same house in the mid-19th century, originally as a tenant, but he eventually purchased the house in 1843 and lived there until he died in 1882. The home remained in the Longfellow family until 1913, when it was then preserved by the Longfellow Trust before the home and everything in it was donated to the National Park Service in 1972. If you want to visit, the grounds are open all year round, but the house itself is only open for guided tours between May and October. From there, we'll head to John Fitzgerald Kennedy National Historic Site. This is actually one of the smallest national park sites in the entire United States, clocking in at just 0.09 acres. It protects a single house in Boston's Brookline neighborhood, that house being, of course, the birthplace and childhood home of America's 35th president, John F. Kennedy. This is the JFK site for the National Park Service, so rather than only focusing on his childhood when he lived here, this site is all about preserving and interpreting the entire life, career, and legacy of JFK, although there is an emphasis on interpreting the life experiences that led JFK to develop the values and worldview that eventually led him to the White House. Like with the Longfellow House, access at this site is seasonal from June through October. Rangers lead tours of the house and the neighborhood, or you can do a self-guided visit during certain hours as well. Staying in the Brookline neighborhood, we'll move to Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site, preserving the property of America's most famous landscape architect. And when I say he was the most famous, I really mean that he basically invented the entire profession of landscape architecture in America. At this location, Olmsted ran the world's first full-time professional landscape architecture firm. And even if you've never heard of Frederick Law Olmsted, you've probably heard about some of the places that he helped design. Central Park in New York City, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the grounds of the US Capitol building in Washington, D.C., basically Boston's entire park system, which is called the Emerald Necklace, and the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. He was also heavily involved in the early days of park building in Yosemite, back when it was still a California state park. Honestly, I could do a whole video on this guy, so let me know if you want to see that. From there, we'll stay in the Boston area, but venture out to Quincy and Adams National Historical Park, protecting several sites associated with the Addams family of American political fame, not the occult cartoon. We have several famous Adamses in US history, namely John Adams, one of our founding fathers and America's second president, his wife Abigail, as well as his son John Quincy Adams, America's sixth president, along with a couple others. This site is dedicated to preserving the lives and legacies of 4 generations of Adams men and women, all the way from the roots of American independence to the emergence of America as a world power. Again, this site has a seasonal availability for tours and has 3 main areas: the farm at Penn's Hill, where John and John Quincy were born, the old house at Peacefield, and the Stone Library. And the final Boston area site we will talk about is Boston Harbor Islands National Recreation Area. Most of the national recreation areas in this country are centered around reservoirs created by the construction of large dams, but there are a handful of which that are centered around urban recreation instead. This latter category is, of course, what the Boston Harbor Islands fit into. This park protects 34 islands scattered throughout Boston Harbor and is managed in partnership with a ton of different agencies and organizations, the Park Service obviously being one of them. These islands have been used for basically anything you can probably think of throughout their entire history, starting with the indigenous tribes that lived there, moving through early colonial settlement, right on through the Industrial Revolution, and into modern day. There's archaeological sites out here, military history sites, famous historic lighthouses, all sorts of stuff. You can do boat tours out here, paddle, hike, camp, picnic. This is a national recreation area, and it is set up primarily for you to recreate there. Moving on to another primarily water-based park, Cape Cod National Seashore. This is the most visited national park site in Massachusetts, seeing over 3 million visitors a year, and it protects over 40,000 acres and 40 miles of Cape Cod, the famous hook-shaped cape that protrudes out from eastern Massachusetts. Protecting the seashore is, of course, the main objective here, but several areas of the park are actually located on the bayside as well, which means you'll find marshes, ponds, and bogs as far as natural landscapes go. And then Cape Cod is really as much a cultural landscape as a natural one, so there are still a bunch of communities that live within or surrounding the national seashore, and they're just as much a part of what this park has to offer as the beaches. On the south coast of Massachusetts lies New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park. Now, as we've seen, Massachusetts' park sites have some administrative oddities going on in terms of land ownership, administration, various partnerships, and so on. And New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park is another one of those. Most of the park is encompassed within a 34-acre historic district in downtown New Bedford and has several sites associated with the city's whaling history, only a few of which are actually owned and operated by the Park Service itself. Again, this is a common theme for Massachusetts parks. The rest are operated with those partnerships we've come to be familiar with. Basically, New Bedford was the heart of the early to mid-19th century whaling industry in America and became known as the city that lit the world because it supplied the whale oil that fueled street lamps across America. At one point, New Bedford was the richest city in the world thanks to this trade in whaling products. All of that history and more is on display here at this park at various museums and historic buildings, again with those partner organizations. And oh yeah, this place inspired Herman Melville to write Moby Dick. Also nearby is Blackstone River Valley National Historical Park, which Massachusetts shares with Rhode Island. Now, you guys know my rule with shared parks. I cover them for the state that has the most of the park's land. In this case, that is Rhode Island, so we'll talk about it then. Moving on, New Bedford is not the only Massachusetts city with a maritime heritage-related national park site dedicated to it. No, north of Boston in Salem, Massachusetts lies Salem Maritime National Historical Park. This was actually the first National Historic Site in the entire United States. And like, it literally just got changed over to a National Historical Park last month. Like, when I made the short form version of this video for Massachusetts parks, it was still a National Historic Site at that time, like just a few months ago. So that just happened. But the fact that it was the first National Historic Site is very significant, because historical interpretation and preservation is one of the key responsibilities of the National Park Service. In general, this park is all about preserving and interpreting the maritime history of Salem/New England/the United States as a whole. There's a bunch of historical interpretation themes on offer here, from the triangle trade to privateering to trade with the Far East to industrialization, plus a whole lot more. It's a small park, just 9 acres, but it is dense when it comes to storytelling and history. From there, we'll move a little bit south to Saugus Ironworks National Historic Site, which protects the location of the first integrated ironworks in North America way back in the mid-1600s. Now, you might not think that was a big deal. Why is this worthy of its very own national park site? Well, in the mid-1600s in colonial America, your only options for getting iron goods were A, literally going all the way to Europe, or B, importing them at exorbitant prices. So the addition of a fully integrated on-site ironworks here in Saugus enabled iron goods to become way cheaper and way more easily accessible in colonial Massachusetts. But then, this ironworks meant that more iron workers could be trained, and then they went out across all of the colonies and spread ironworking technology there too. And because iron was like indispensable to civilization back then, and still today, yeah, this was a big deal and signaled the beginning of more large-scale development in the American colonies. Up next, another site important to the industrial development of America, but this time a few hundred years later, Lowell National Historical Park. Located in Lowell, Massachusetts, this is one of America's most important Industrial Revolution sites, as Lowell was very important in the early days of textile manufacturing, which launched America into the industrial age, and in many ways, the modern world itself. Lowell was already well positioned for industrial development due to its position along the Merrimack River, its canal system, and its ability to take advantage of the 32-foot Pawtucket Falls for powering water mills for manufacturing. But Lowell is also important for what it did not do. See, at the time, there was a feeling that industrializing cities in England and kind of everywhere were cramped and dirty and unsanitary, and Lowell didn't think it had to be that way. So they built a planned industrial community, emphasizing open space and cleanliness and better living conditions. This was known as the Lowell Experiment and set Lowell apart in an industrial area best remembered for dirty, grimy, soot-stained communities. South of Lowell and out in the Boston suburbs lies Minuteman National Historical Park, a Revolutionary War site. In fact, this site is dedicated to the first battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which began in April of 1775. This is mostly a linear park, tracing the battle routes from that fateful day when America's journey to independence began. The main thrust of the park is along the 5-mile Battle Road Trail, where you can find several significant sites and historic structures, such as the location where Paul Revere was captured during his midnight ride. There's also a discontiguous section of the park where you can go and see the Old North Bridge in Concord, where the shot heard round the world that began the American Revolution was fired. I've actually been to that spot, and it's just really powerful standing in the spot where such a significant piece of US history took place. This is also a really good recreational park with the abundance of trails it has on offer. And finally, we move out of the general Boston sphere of influence east to Springfield, Massachusetts, where we find the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. This site protects the location of America's first ever federal armory. It began manufacturing muskets in 1794 and made weapons used by American troops in every major conflict in the nation's history before closing down in 1968. Springfield Armory is known for its innovation and engineering in the field of firearms manufacturing, and to this day still houses the world's largest collection of US military firearms. It was reopened as a National Historic Site in 1978. And finally, Massachusetts is home to 2 National Scenic Trails. Now, not all National Scenic Trails are part of the National Park System. It's a complicated situation, but in this case, these 2 ones in Massachusetts in particular are the Appalachian National Scenic Trail and the New England National Scenic Trail. The Appalachian NST I've covered in both the Virginia and Maine episodes already, so I won't go into too much detail here. Y'all know the drill, 14 states, 2,200 miles, etc. Massachusetts has 90 miles of the AT. The New England National Scenic Trail, though, we have not talked about here yet. It's one of the newest NSTs to be added to the national park system, joining the Ice Age and North Country Scenic Trails in 2023. This trail is 215 miles long, traverses 2 states, Connecticut and Massachusetts, and is actually a combination of 3 different trails: the Metacomet Monadnock Trail, the Metabasset Trail, and the Metacomet Trail. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those correctly. I don't care. These trails actually do continue on into New Hampshire, but for some reason, the National Scenic Trail designation specifically just stops abruptly at the New Hampshire border. And basically, this trail is meant to showcase New England, or at least a small portion of it. It starts down in the Long Island Sound of Connecticut and travels into the highlands of Massachusetts, traversing classic New England scenery, small towns, and farmlands. And that is everything, my friends. All 17 national park sites in Massachusetts. I've given you a heavy dose of history covering all aspects of the American story from our earliest beginnings all the way up to the present day. That's Massachusetts for you, though. There can be no doubt that it has played a pivotal role in our development as a country, something its park sites are keenly aware of and do an excellent job showcasing for us as visitors. I would love to know how many of these you've been to and which ones were your favorites. Let me know down in the comments below. As always, direct support on Patreon is very much appreciated. It helps me keep on cranking out these videos for you guys. All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.